hangar at Ellington Field in Houston empty now, but just minutes from now, a NASA plane will be pulling in with the one-year crew member Scott Kelly making his return home to the United States. Welcome from NASA's Johnson Space Center. Thanks for staying up late tonight with us. I'm Dan Hewitt. Again, Scott Kelly just minutes away now from a landing in Houston, just a little over 24 hours since touching down in wintry Kazakhstan after a historic 340 days in space. A lot of folks are going to be gathering out at Ellington to welcome Scott home. Among them, various dignitaries from the White House, including Dr. Jill Biden, the Second Lady of the United States, John Holdren, the White House science advisor, a number of NASA management folks, including Charles Bolden, the NASA administrator, Ellen Ochoa, the center director, and of course, Scott's friends and family. He's going to be looking forward to seeing his loved ones, his children, and his twin brother Mark Kelly and his wife Gabby Giffords all gathering out there at Ellington awaiting his return. Right now, that return is scheduled to come just about 10 minutes from now at 1:20 a.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be eagerly awaiting. We'll be giving you a live view of the landing, the taxi through the runway, and the pull-in to the hangar as we will wait for Scott to walk down the stairs just a few minutes later. Scott Kelly, of course, launched just about 1 year ago from Kazakhstan on March 27th, 2015, when he would begin a historic stay on board the International Space Station. That launch coming from Baikonur when he was on board a Soyuz spacecraft along with Mikhail Kornienko, who spent the entire year with Scott. They launched with Gennady Padalka, the all-time record holder for time in space among all of humanity, launching flawlessly and arriving just 6 hours later. They made their way in and were welcomed by the current Expedition 43 crew on board, Terry Virts, Samantha Cristoforetti, and Anton Shkaplerov, who were already several months into their mission. But for Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, the first steps into the space station and what would be their home for the next 340 days. And of course, all of that came to a culmination just last night as Scott Kelly, Mikhail Kornienko, and Sergey Volkov said farewell to their crew members, and for Scott and Mikhail said farewell to their home in space for the last year. They said their final goodbyes and made their way into their Soyuz spacecraft, a different one than they arrived in. This one actually arrived to the station in September when Sergey Volkov flew with 2 visiting crew members to deliver the taxi up there and bring these crew members back home. The hatches were closed, and then after that, a series of leak checks just to make sure the vehicle was ready to make the trip home. Everything going flawlessly yesterday evening. Here on the station, you can see the crew members who are still on board is Expedition 47, Tim Kopra, Tim Peake, and Yuri Malenchenko. We're going to continue all the science on board the station for the next several months. Once the hatch was closed on the Soyuz side and on the station side, a series of leak checks were completed, and then everything was set up for undocking. That undocking took place at 7:02 p.m. Central Time, 8:02 p.m. Eastern. The Soyuz slowly backing away at a snail-like rate of only 1/10 of a meter per second, and with that undocking, Expedition 47 officially beginning, but the beginning of a trip home for the one-year crew. Again, all of this happened just yesterday, March 1st, so we're a little over 24 hours from all of these events as we get ready to welcome Scott home to his first steps back on U.S. soil. That undocking coming successfully. This a view from the Soyuz as it looked down at the entire station structure and the Earth orbiting beneath it. It was only about 3.5 hours from that undocking, though, until it was time for the capsule to return home. The Soyuz spacecraft does so under a large parachute, setting up for an eventual touchdown in the Kazakh steppe and the vast expanses of the Kazakh deserts. As you can see, cloudy conditions, but fairly nice temperatures. The weather not too inclement out there, and the search and recovery forces, the various helicopters, the NASA, the Russian personnel able to track the capsule all the way down and get the crew members out safely and quickly. And this was, again, the first fresh of breath air for 2 of these crew members, Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, in over 340 days as they conducted that historic year on board the station. Sergey Volkov was the first out of the Soyuz capsule, and he was the commander of the vehicle last night for all of its events. Volkov, a veteran space flyer who was making his third flight on board the International Space Station, well in excess of 500 days on his all-time spaceflight resume. For Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, it was 340 days, and all told, they spent 5,440 orbits around our planet. Now, when you rack up the mileage on that, that's 143 million miles, coincidentally about the same distance you would have to travel if you were on a mission to Mars. And this one-year mission, the next step in the International Space Station's use as a platform for preparing us for that journey to Mars. Again, this view from yesterday, it was evening here in Houston when the crew touched down, but morning out in Kazakhstan, about 12 hours ahead of us here in Houston. Kelly giving a lot of thumbs up there on the ground, reporting he was doing well. And now we're getting reports the plane about to land at Ellington, so we will cut out live, and there it is, the NASA plane down on the field in Ellington. Scott Kelly back here in Houston. So on board this plane, Scott Kelly is joined by a crew of NASA personnel who made the trip out to Kazakhstan to bring him home as quickly, as expeditiously as possible. This done on the NASA plane to get these crew members hopefully within 24 hours or so after their landing, so they can begin giving medical tests, various data takes to all of the scientists and medical personnel responsible for doing all of the science around their missions. Of course, many of the crew members liken themselves to guinea pigs at times, but they are themselves very much the experiment, and a lot of the work still to come for Scott Kelly is just because he's not in space anymore doesn't mean the science stops, so a lot of work still to go for him. But Scott Kelly in the NASA plane taxiing on the runway now down at Ellington in Houston. And again, at this point, Scott's friends, family, invited guests, and various dignitaries are there out at Ellington. They'll await for the plane to pull into the hangar, at which point, before they can say hello to Scott, there's actually a bit of processing he'll have to go through. Scott and everybody on board will be going through the exact same U.S. Customs and Border Protection processing as any U.S. citizen would returning to the United States. So, believe it or not, a trip into outer space treated much like a trip overseas to any other country. So for Scott Kelly, that'll be the first order of business before he's able to get off the plane. And you can see all of the various friends, family, NASA dignitaries, and those from the White House accompanying Second Lady Dr. Jill Biden to welcome Scott home after a historic mission. Here now, the NASA plane pulling into the hangar out at Ellington. It's made the trip in under 24 hours now, stopping twice for fueling on the way back from Dzhezkazgan, Kazakhstan. The plane did hit a bit of inclement weather and crosswinds, so our landing a little bit delayed if you've been following along, but the plane now on the ground pulling into the hangar out there at Ellington. And with that, the plane comes to a stop. Again, the first order of business going to be that customs processing for everybody on board. Is this stop in Houston is the first port of call for them on returning to the United States. And once that's complete, we'll begin to see the friends, family, guests, and other dignitaries begin to file in and get ready to welcome Scott home after his stay in space. And again, a live view of NASA 992, the plane returning Scott Kelly home to Houston, just now pulled into the hangar. Again, the first order of business will be those customs checks, and then they'll be able to begin deplaning. On board, Scott Kelly's joined by a number of personnel, including his flight surgeon, Dr. Stephen Gilmore. 2 astronauts also on board, Chris Cassidy, the chief astronaut, as well as Joe Acaba, NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius, also riding along with the team, along with the pilots and various aircraft support personnel to make the journey. And so one of the first people we should actually see get off the plane will be Joel Montalbano, and he is the Deputy Program Manager for the International Space Station in charge of utilization, which is a fancy word for science that we like to use. He'll actually be coming off the plane with scientific samples that came from Kelly and came down in the Soyuz spacecraft and are going to be returned as quickly as possible to labs to begin analysis. And again, at this point, customs officials getting ready and getting onto the plane to do a quick passport check for all of these individuals. And after that, we'll be able to begin our events, get Scott Kelly off that plane, and allow him to greet all of the gathered people. Very excited to see him, many of them, all of them. I haven't seen him for about a year at this point, so obviously a lot of excitement out there at Ellington, a lot of excitement here at the Johnson Space Center. And so again, a lot of the science not done yet with Scott Kelly's one-year mission. A lot more for him to do, having returned now to Earth. However, while he was on board, science was the primary goal, as it is with all of these expeditions. But something was very special about Scott's year in space, as it is really a stepping stone to getting us ready and trying to answer all of the questions that are still outstanding before we can start sending humans to Mars. One of the most important studies Kelly was involved with was called fluid shifts, and is studying and trying to explain and counteract a phenomenon that is noticed, that has been found with some crew members, not all, where they actually lose visual acuity. So they lose some of their visual prowess while they're in space, and it doesn't always come back to normal once they're back on the ground. The fluid shift study used a Chibis device. It's a funny pantsuit, actually, that the Russians would wear traditionally before they returned home, that counteracts what's known as fluid shifts. So when you're in the microgravity environment, all of that fluid that naturally pools in your legs down here on planet Earth redistributes, a lot of it going through your torso area, but it's specifically the head. and that is one of the suspected culprits for causing this visual problem, is that increased pressure in the head. So Fluid Shift's a groundbreaking study with both Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko looking to counteract or target one of the prime suspects for that visual problem, and then develop the countermeasures that will be able to keep our astronauts, cosmonauts safe in orbit. Now, this study again made use of both Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, both one-year crew members, and both NASA and Roscosmos already deciding to continue that on into the future. However, that wasn't the only study that he took place in. Over 400 studies taking place on board the International Space Station during Scott's time on orbit. That ranged from everything from material science to those human research projects to a number of other studies that are getting us ready for the journey to Mars. One that caught a lot of people's attention and a lot of people's imagination was the work with the veggie experiment, which is studying plant growth in outer space. As we know, everything that we do in microgravity very different from how we do it down here on planet Earth, and veggie no different. Looking to study how we can grow plants, simple plants at first, but eventually with the goal of growing nutritional fruits, vegetables, things like that that the crew members don't always have access to when they're in space. That would add a lot of nutritional value and a very great psychological tool as well to keep these astronauts very interested. Getting word now that they're getting ready to go off the plane, so we're going to go back out to Ellington Field to make sure we catch this live. And there we see Joe Acaba and one of the backup flight surgeons, and NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius, Dr. Stephen Gilmore, and then Chris Cassidy, and then the man himself, the man of the hour, Scott Kelly, coming off the plane. And as we've seen since he touched down, Scott Kelly in very great spirits, looking in very great health. Brother Mark Kelly there on the left, as you can probably tell, saying hello to his father. With Scott Kelly off the plane, though, a 15 to 20 minute timer has started as he is scheduled to be in crew quarters fairly soon to begin those data takes. But for now, savoring the moment back in Houston, seeing his family for the first time in a year, a very special moment. And they're greeting Dr. Jill Biden, Second Lady of the United States. And on the right there is Dr. John Holdren, the White House Science Advisor. And there, Johnson Space Center Director Ellen Ochoa.
Sorry we're so late.
You weren't waiting for it.
Here's Joel's flash. He's going to teach me in the morning. Oh, really? So you're getting on the Air Force. All right. Yeah. I give you one. Feel like a year? Yeah. Look good, Scott.
You see your plane? I would have been here.
Scott Kelly saying hello to Terry Virts and Kjell Lindgren, two NASA astronauts who served on board the International Space Station during his year in space.
say a few things. I wanted to say a few words to everyone before. I know it's late, and it would have been great to get here quicker. I'm used to going 17,500 miles an hour, but this airplane doesn't do quite that, so it took us some time. But with the great support of the crew, we got here safely. You know, it was a very long trip. When I left here in February, I don't even know what day it was in February. I was 50, and now I'm 52. So, but it feels great. It's great to be back in Texas, on U.S. soil. It's just an unbelievable feeling to be back here on planet Earth, back in our great country, and back with all my family and my friends. I want to recognize my girlfriend and partner, Mikhail, here, that's been in lockstep with me the whole time during this whole experience, helping me in an incredible way all along the way. My daughters, Samantha and Charlotte. Charlotte came all the way from Virginia today, so she's probably pretty tired. My brother Mark, who has been very, very supportive of me the whole way, and my friends and family. But also I want to obviously recognize Dr. Biden for coming out here to welcome me home. It's very, very special, and thank you. It's a real honor. And Dr. Holdren and General Bolden as well. I really, really appreciate that. I missed everyone very much. 340 days aboard the space station represented the coming together of thousands of people, engineers, flight controllers, support personnel, scientists, flight surgeons, especially my flight surgeon over here, Steve Gilmore, who was the only guy besides my family that was a part of this for the entire year. Certainly there were program managers and stuff, but he was there every day for me. He's been my doctor for the last 10 years. And thanks to all these people that did their job exceptionally well. I'm back here on Earth and back safely. I also want to say this was not my flight. They've talked about my year in space. It's not my achievement, it's NASA's achievement, and it's our country's achievement. I was lucky to spend an incredible year with some incredible people that are here today to greet me back on Earth, crew members that are here and people that aren't here, American astronauts, astronauts from other countries, and Russian cosmonauts from around the world. It was a privilege to fly with all of them. You know, one of the things that I thought a lot about during this year is that there's no greater privilege than serving your country however and wherever you might do it. This mission is the latest achievement in our country's space program, but it's not the last. There will be more. It's in our DNA of our country to explore, and we must never stop doing this. We must lead, we must learn, and we must discover. Thank you all very much for coming out here to see me. And again, I just want to emphasize this is a huge team effort. Amico told me one time, teamwork makes the dream work, and this is the biggest team sport there is, space flight, and it's about all of us, not just one person. Thank you.
We're going to let Scott get out of here, but before we do, one quick thing I wanted to say, Scott, on behalf of all of us in your team, welcome home. I want to thank your entire family and your friends who have been supporting you, who've been through this, made special sacrifices. I think all of you heard Scott talk about the fact that his flight was another step on the journey to Mars, and he has done an incredible job. People love you. They love everything you've done. So on behalf of all of us, welcome back. And I want to introduce the President and Science Advisor, Dr. John Holdren, who I think wants to say thanks to.
Well, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Scott, for your amazing service. You very generously noted it's not just your achievement, it's NASA's achievement, it's the country's achievement. That's all true, but you were out there at the point of the spear, and you have your whole career set an example that's an inspiration to our young people, it's an inspiration to the country, it's an inspiration to the world. I also want to recognize the extraordinary role of your brother Mark, who on top of his 4 missions in space, was now monitored the whole time you were up there being monitored. Mark was down here being monitored, giving us an unprecedented benchmark of extraordinary relevance to understand the physiological changes to which people are exposed in space. It's going to help us figure out how to deal with those physiological changes on the even longer missions that are ahead when we go to Mars, and we are going to go to Mars. There is no doubt about that. We are committed to it. We're going to get it done. And you really have established the latest milestone on that very challenging pathway. So thank you for that. And let me now turn it over to Dr. Jill Biden, the Second Lady of the United States, who was very gracious to come and join this event.
Oh, thank you. Welcome home, Scott, on behalf of President Obama, our First Lady Michelle Obama, our Vice President, my husband, and all Americans. I want to congratulate you on your year in space, and you truly are an inspiration to all of us. I had the opportunity to bring some military children here with me tonight, and who are involved with STEM education, and they got to see the Johnson Space Center, and to meet your family, your wonderful family, and Mark, and really, you just inspired them to want to go into the space program and be a part of it. And you're doing that for so many young Americans, and I thank you for that. So good luck. I brought you some beer and apple pie. Nothing's more American than that. Oh. Yeah. That's what he said he wanted, so that's what I brought him. The beer is from the president, actually, from the garden, and the apple pie is just from all Americans. So we hold you in our hearts. Welcome home.
And so at this point, Scott Kelly making his way into the van. He's going to be headed off to crew quarters to begin the reconditioning process and all of the medical checkups and the data takes. Responsible for continuing his mission now that he's back down here on the ground. And so with that, Scott Kelly back on U.S. soil for the first time in more than a year, back with his friends and family and back here in Houston. And of course, like we said, the science doesn't stop just because Scott's not in space anymore. He's going to continue giving samples and data takes over the next year. So his one-year mission, very much a three-year mission with both all of the stuff he did before flight, during, and now what's ahead for him afterwards. And of course, this isn't the last time we're going to see Scott Kelly this week, as we are going to have some exciting press conferences coming up on Friday, March 4th. The first of those will be our one-year mission science briefing, where we will sit down with some of the brilliant minds behind the one-year science mission, both the human research and the larger station research at large, as well as Mark Kelly, Scott's twin brother. That'll take place at 12 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern. And then, of course, will be the moment to talk with Scott Kelly, his first media availability following his return from space after 340 days, and that'll be at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern here at the Johnson Space Center. So with that, be sure to follow along with the one-year mission online at nasa.gov/1year. And thank you for tuning in this evening to welcome back Scott Kelly to Houston and to welcome him back at the end of his mission. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Enjoy the rest of your evening.